Y'all was never there for them. How many birthdays did you miss? Mikey, his ex-girlfriend, did more for him than any of y'all.
Mom, you have to stop. This is a hearing.
Some of the most vile and ruthless murderers are women who took the lives of others, sometimes for the most trivial reasons, and other times with no reason at all. These are the stories of female serial killers whose crimes and reactions to their sentences are nothing short of an absolute nightmare.
24-year-old Rebecca Frick, emotional, being taken back into custody. The Erie resident is accused of trying to kill 38-year-old Michelle Muir.
Rebecca Frick, the 24-year-old lady, was sentenced to 40 years in prison for the murder of an older woman with whom she had an altercation with not so long ago. People commit murder over something that has been going on for a while, but then killing someone over an altercation that happened just a while back is crazy. With a Joker face on top. It was said to have happened at a gas station when Rebecca Frick and 38-year-old Mitchell Muir got into a heated argument over Mitchell and her boyfriend, who was present at the scene, deciding not to tie their 10-month-old pit bull to a leash. And it bothered Rebecca. Both women had a heated argument that almost resulted in violence. Mitchell's boyfriend managed to settle the dispute and closed Rebecca's door as both parties went on their way, but that was not the end of it.
The crime happened at around 3 a.m. on August 24th. The victim's longtime boyfriend, Kevin Barnett, testified in court.
The crime was said to have happened at about 3 a.m. on the 24th of August. Mitchell's boyfriend, Kevin Barnett, testified in court and explained what had happened. After the altercation at the gas station, it turned out that Rebecca was still following the couple, as if she had something in mind to do. Eventually, they reached an intersection not far from the Shell gas station at E6 and Parade Street. The intersection was at E6 and Wallace Street, and that was when Kevin said he spotted Rebecca's car speeding towards them with no headlights on as she slammed into Mitchell and the dog, calling for a very terrible hit-and-run scenario. She was spotted by the surveillance cameras that caught her face while she was making the escape, but there was no footage of the hit and run. Mitchell died in the hospital the next day as the impact on her head was too hard.
The Erie resident is accused of trying to kill 38-year-old Michelle Muir by hitting her with her car. The crime happened at around 3 a.m. on August 24th.
Rebecca Frick was sentenced to about 40 years in prison while being charged with third-degree murder. It was a really emotional day for Rebecca as she was crying all through as she was being taken into custody for the murder of Mitchell. The regret could be seen in her face as she faced her long but just sentence. While she was initially charged with just third-degree murder, the judge saw reason to add 2 more charges to her case, in which evidence backed it up: animal cruelty and criminal homicide. The prosecutors also added 3 charges to the 3 already standing. 2 out of those 3 were aggravated assault and failure to stop and render aid, which were also added to her case, making the case pretty much sealed at this point. In view of it all, Rebecca Frick was sentenced to 40 years in jail for this crime and was sober all through, as she didn't mean to kill Mitchell.
In court today, saying Frick was a loving mother and good friend. Before handing down the sentence, Judge.
The plea of Rebecca's elder sister and her friend proved to be worthwhile, at least, as they both stated that Rebecca was an amazing sister, a loving friend, and a caring mother to her kids. But still, the law is the law, and it had to be upheld. The judge stated that the verdict was passed in fairness to all parties involved, as the sentence was duly accepted by all parties. For all we know, if it were to be in some states under a prosecution that doesn't want to be viewed from either side, this could be first-degree murder, and she could be sentenced to death for that. But she got 40 years old, and by the time she gets out, she'd already be a grandma.
There was some stuff in the floor right there where you walk in. I don't even know what it was now.
Mitchell Desbane. Murderers have their reasons for committing murder, while this culprit here, Mitchell Desbane, was an evil mastermind and a crafty young woman. She wanted money so badly that destroying the relationship between her husband, Mark Desbane, and his parents was not enough for her. She not only cut ties between the parents and son, but also took the life of Mark Desbane, as her ultimate goal was to get the life insurance money that she discovered her husband had bought. As a result, she murdered the young man. While Mark was in a family business with his parents, which flourished extraordinarily well before Mitchell came into his life, with a stepdaughter from her previous lover, and even after she came into his life, the business was still going well. However, she started filling Mark with lies about his parents, which often caused arguments between Mark and his parents. Eventually, their business together came to an end, and Mark started out on his own, with Mitchell managing his money. But the plotter didn't stop there, as it seemed she was set on ruining the life of her in-laws. She went as far as telling her daughter, Mark's stepdaughter, to take intimate photos of herself and have them sent to Jack's phone. P.S. Jack was the father of Mark and her father-in-law. As a result of the shaming pictures on his phone, his wife Tana left him. After a couple of years of Mitchell's daughter conflicting evidence over and over again, the police saw no valid reason to keep Jack in detention, so they released him, and he was free of all charges. After this, his wife came back to him as he was not the monster that she had portrayed him as. But in spite of all that, the relationship between parent and son was well out of reach.
Footage from the bank where Michelle worked provided an alibi, confirming that she was with her father, Carl, at the time of Mark's murder.
It was discovered that after a little while, Mark's company was in serious debt of over $1 million and had no funds to offset it, while some speculate that Mitchell was siphoning money out of the company funds to other endeavors, one of which was financing her lover, who was a banker at the place she worked. She then discovered that she would be paid $1 million as a life insurance policy fund if Mark were to ever pass away. That was when the brutal thought came to mind.
And all that you need to get off your chest, Michelle.
Just that I was seeing a guy, but my dad didn't know that. Mark didn't. I mean, nobody knew that. Nobody knew that.
It was the 24th of August, and Mitchell was just coming home from work when a horrifying scene was awaiting her. She called 911 as she met her husband in a pool of blood on the floor of their home. While the investigation was going on at the crime scene, investigators found out that Mark had been shot at very close range, twice, once on his left chest and right in the middle of both his eyes. But the only thing that confused the police was the fact that it looked like a burglary scene, but no valuables were taken away from the house, except Mark's life. This was where things began to look fishy.
What happened to your husband, ma'am? He's scared. Oh, no. Ma'am, I need you to take a deep breath, okay, and tell me what's going on.
In this very short audio, you could hear the conversation between Mitchell and the 911 operative.
I hate to think that his dad would do anything like that, because it is his son, but he's just very...
As she was evidently panicking over the phone and couldn't even be audible enough. The case became rather confusing, and it was worse when Mitchell and her father, Carl Kelly, were openly framing Jack for the murder of his son. As she was being interrogated, she spewed tears and snot that were all fake. But the idea was turned aside, as there was no evidence to back anything up. The police were initially going to leave the case. In fact, they had left it and released Mark's body to Mitchell to bury him. She didn't allow his family to see his body at all. Only before he was cast into the grave did they see him. To her, she seemed to have won and become $1 million richer. But then a twist occurred. The police initially left the case as they felt there was no headway to it, but not until Terrence Parker decided to come out and brag to the public that he was the one who killed Mark Despain did the police get the tip and follow up immediately. Residents also noted that on the day of the murder, they noticed an old Mercedes circling Mark's house as if someone was taking a watch or something. The police called Terrence Parker in for questioning, where he didn't hesitate to confess to killing Mark Despain. He stated to them that he didn't know Mark personally or anything like that, as he was only given money to carry out the assignment. He then implicated a second person, who happened to be a neighbor of Mark, Johnny Hubbard. He was one of the tenants in the buildings that Mark owned, and Mitchell's father was a rent collector in this particular building. He was the one who approached Terrence to commit the deed, and it later turned out that he was the owner of the old Mercedes that was circling the area on the day of Mark's death. And in no time, Hubbard immediately implicated Carl Kelly, the father of Mitchell, and told the police that he was the one who gave them access to the house in the first instance. The confusing puzzle was starting to come together now, and it was all beginning to make valid sense, except there was one more person left. That's right, Mitchell was still in the clear, sort of, but not for long.
There was some stuff in the floor right there where you walk in. I don't even know what it was now.
The situation inadvertently called for the police to call for Mitchell, and while they did that and started asking her new questions, she turned to blame her father for the death, stating that he wanted to kill Mark and keep the life insurance money for himself, which was her own motive for hiring the string of murderers to kill her husband. Well, there was no need for too much argument, as the police managed to tap into the phones of all suspects, and then they saw a conversation between Mitchell and her father, telling him it had to be today, which was the day of Mark's death. As a result of that, she lured Mark out of the house in order to allow her plan to work accordingly, and that was exactly what happened.
Both Carl and Terrence entered guilty pleas to the charge of first-degree murder and were sentenced to 35 years in prison.
While there were 4 individuals involved in the murder of Mark Despain, all 4 of them got their sentences according to the role each of them played in this murder. Her father, Carl Kelly, got sentenced to 35 years in prison, and the shooter also got the same sentence. Meanwhile, Johnny was guilty of obstructing an arrest, and he pleaded guilty as well. For that, he was sentenced to 18 years in prison, plus an additional 40 years for breaking his parole, while the mastermind of the entire operation got a 30-year sentence with parole after the 5th year, after which she was released following her guilty plea in 2014. She was released in 2019 and has kept a very low profile since then.
Michelle Blair herself admits to killing her 2 children, and she is angry when she puts much of the blame on the children's 2 fathers.
Mitchell Blair brutally tortured and murdered 2 of her children, then stored their bodies in her freezer for over 2 years, while she and her remaining kids continued on living in that very same house. In 2015, 35-year-old Mitchell Blair was living on the east side of Detroit with her 4 children when she was evicted for not paying rent. At first glance, nothing about Blair's case seemed particularly unusual. She was unemployed and had been struggling financially. Relatives say she had previously asked them for money. When the eviction crew from the 36th District Court showed up at Blair's home on the morning of March 24, 2015, she wasn't there. So the crew went inside and began removing furniture from the home. But when they went to move her freezer, they stumbled upon a horrifying discovery that would send shockwaves through the Detroit community. When the Wayne County Sheriff's Department bailiff opened a white deep freezer located in Mitchell Blair's living room, they discovered the frozen body of a teenage girl wrapped in a large plastic bag, and buried beneath her was another body, a young boy wrapped in a blanket. A neighbor didn't waste any time disclosing Mitchell Blair's whereabouts. Police soon found her at another neighbor's house with 2 of her children, aged 8 and 17. But her other children, Stephen Gage Barry and Stony Ann Blair, were missing. After some brief questioning, Mitchell Blair confessed to killing the children and stuffing them in her freezer. As she was being handcuffed, she reportedly told the police that she wasn't evil. Meanwhile, authorities took the bodies to a morgue where they had to thaw for 3 days before an autopsy could be performed. The bodies were identified as Stephen Barry and Stony Blair. The medical examiner ruled their deaths homicides, naming blunt force trauma as their cause of death. The medical examiner also ruled that thermal injuries had contributed to Stephen's death. It was determined that Stephen was killed in August 2012 at the age of 9, and Stony was killed in May 2013 at the age of 13. Mitchell Blair confessed to the murders at the Wayne County Circuit Court. According to the Times record, she told Judge Dana Hathaway that she killed the demons after finding out they were sexually abusing her youngest son, a claim that has never been substantiated. Blair said that one day in August 2012, she walked into a room of her Detroit home to find her youngest son simulating sexual activity using toys. Horrified, Blair asked him if anyone had ever touched him that way. The boy allegedly told her that his 9-year-old brother Stephen had. Blair stormed into Stephen's room in a rage. After Stephen allegedly confessed to sexually abusing his younger brother, Blair immediately began punching and kicking him. She said she continued to torture her son over a period of about 2 weeks, starving him, making him drink Windex, asphyxiating him with a plastic bag, and repeatedly pouring scalding hot water on his genitals, causing his skin to peel off. Stephen succumbed to his injuries on August 30, 2012. After finding him unresponsive beside a puddle of vomit, Mitchell Blair wrapped his body in a blanket and hid him in her deep freezer. In court, Mitchell Blair told the judge that she did not feel any remorse over her actions.
Yes, that day would tell me different things because he was doing this to him for years, and I did not know that.
Prosecutor Karen Goldfarb stated that they found no evidence of rape, and Mitchell's oldest child, Gabby, said there was no concrete evidence that either of the children sexually assaulted her younger brother. Gabby claimed that her youngest brother only told Mitchell about the alleged sexual assault after incessant questioning because he didn't know any better. "My mom was a ticking time bomb," Gabby said. "She always had her fuse lit, so anything the slightest tap would set her off." In June 2015, Mitchell Blair pleaded guilty to 1 count of first-degree premeditated murder and 1 count of felony murder. She is now serving a life sentence at the Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan, without the possibility of parole.
They said they want to make an impact statement. I actually want to make a statement to them.
Vonda Smith. During the evening of August 12, 2016, Donald Cohn Jr. was taking his dog for a stroll along Judge Neal Loop, a secluded and rarely used road near Afton. Unbeknownst to him, this leisurely walk would result in a disturbing revelation. He came across the motionless body of a young woman. Without delay, Donald notified the authorities, initiating a sequence of events that would expose a heinous crime. The victim's identity was unknown at first, but it was soon uncovered. Within hours of the discovery, Jessica Morrison's mother and fiancé arrived at the police station concerned about her disappearance earlier that day. Jessica, a 21-year-old mother of 2, was tragically identified by her tattoos. The autopsy showed that she had died from severe head trauma. As the investigation progressed, attention started to focus on an unexpected individual, Vonda Smith, the grandmother of Jessica's children. Vonda had been responsible for taking care of Jessica's sons, but their bond had become strained, resulting in canceled arrangements and a sense of unease. Jessica's family held the belief that Vonda had become excessively entangled in their affairs. Detectives discovered significant evidence implicating Vonda Smith, as bloodstains discovered inside her vehicle suggested Jessica had been present. Nevertheless, Vonda's defense contended that her physical stature and well-being rendered it improbable for her to have administered the savage blows that resulted in Jessica's demise. The introduction of DNA evidence brought about additional complexities. Although male DNA was discovered beneath Jessica's fingernails, it did not correspond to any known individuals connected to the case. Gary Ely, Jessica's fiancé, was implicated in the case based on DNA analysis, as his genetic material matched the sperm found on her underwear. Nevertheless, the potential involvement of a third individual as the father of a child remained unresolved. The prosecution argued that Vonda Smith was the primary suspect in Jessica's murder. The presence of bloodstains in Vonda's car, her involvement in the children's lives, and the strained relationships within the family pointed to her as a potential perpetrator. However, questions about Vonda's physical capability to carry out such a brutal attack raised doubts about her guilt. Witnesses played a crucial role in shaping the case. Conflicting accounts of Jessica's whereabouts on the day of her murder and the sighting of a white van further muddied the waters. The credibility of these witnesses and the timeline of events remained a subject of debate throughout the trial.
Judge John F. Duggar Jr. listened to both the mitigating and enhancement factors from Smith's attorney Gene Scott and the state.
Vonda Smith underwent a trial regarding the homicide of Jessica Morrison, but her reaction during the prosecution was shocking. In the month of May, in the year 2018, she showed no remorse and was all smiles. She even found the time to hug her attorney.
Greene County Sheriff's Department Detective James Randolph.
A jury declared her culpable of first-degree murder in relation to Jessica's demise, as well as second-degree murder for the loss of her unborn child. Consequently, she received a life imprisonment term with the potential for parole after completing 51 years, essentially constituting a lifelong incarceration.
You will have an effective sentence of life imprisonment.
After the sentencing, Tammy Morrison, Jesse's mother, took the stand.
Her smiles receded after that, and then she began to cry, which is understandable but also confusing due to her early reactions.
2 hours after Donald had made the discovery.
Jordi Arias. Travis Victor Alexander was an American salesman who was murdered by his ex-girlfriend, Jodi Ann Arias, in his house in Mesa, Arizona, while in the shower. Arias was convicted of first-degree murder on May 8, 2013, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on April 13, 2015.
First-degree murder, guilty. 5 jurors find premeditated, 0 find felony murder.
Alexander sustained 27 stab wounds, a slit throat, and a single gunshot wound to the forehead. Arias testified that she killed him in self-defense, but she was convicted by the jury of first-degree murder. During the sentencing phase, the jury deadlocked on the death penalty option, and Arias was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Alexander's death and the subsequent investigation and trial attracted widespread media coverage in the United States. Alexander was murdered at his house in Mesa, Arizona on Wednesday, June 4, 2008, while he was taking a shower. He sustained 27 stab wounds, a slit throat, and a gunshot wound to the head. Medical examiner Kevin Horn would later testify that Alexander's jugular vein, common carotid artery, and trachea had been slashed, and that he had defensive wounds on his hands. Horn further testified that Alexander might have been dead at the time the gunshot was inflicted, and that the back wounds were shallow. Alexander's death was ruled a homicide. He was buried at Riverside's Olivewood Memorial Park Cemetery. On April 13, 2015, Arias was sentenced to life in prison without parole in the 2008 slaying of her boyfriend Alexander, and she was seen shedding what was described as crocodile tears.
Ma'am, were you crying when you were shooting him?
I don't remember.
Were you crying when you were stabbing him?
There are numerous cases of women who were killed brutally for even the strangest reasons ever, and the number doesn't go down at all. As the day passes, someone somewhere sees a reason why she should end the life of someone. I guess it's humane that way, but it's just crazy. Nothing we can do about that now, though we just gonna have to live with it, and then people would have to live with the results of their actions. Do you think that the sentences were substantial, or they should have gotten something harsher than they did? Let us know down below, and if you enjoyed these cases, then watch our next ones shown on screen.